my fellow citizens of all nations. In this video I'm going to talk about The Jewish State by Theodor Herzl. He is founding father of modern Jewish state, and he is basically a man who came up with the ideology that enabled the Jewish state to exist. Because as Herzl stated himself, no man is powerful or rich enough to create a state. Only ideology is that powerful. Only ideology can unite people. And he sees the value and the importance of ideology. And he writes his work to inspire the Jews, and he understands that he won't be able to see fruits of his own labor, but other Jews will be able to see it, and the Jewish state will exist. And usually in my other videos I usually go through quotes, but I remember quite well this book right now, especially it's not big or that sort of a complicated, because at the end of the day the book is focused on the narrow subject. It is the existence of the existence and creation and conquest, basically with creation of the Jewish state. This is the subject of entire conversation. So this is much more simpler, just to basically connect different information. And especially I found this way of thinking very interesting. And first of all, to me, especially in first few chapters of his book, he seems like a very melancholic man who is very patriotic for Europe, and but he's simply disappointed by reality. Basically, he leaves this image when reading his book. Basically, sort of a man who is very idealistic, very patriotic toward Europe, but at the same time, person who is at the same time very rational, and realizes that Europeans are too backward right now, right at this moment. Even though he says himself that humans will eventually progress, and human progress will eventually come, but it goes very slowly, dreadfully slowly, in fact. And so he sees this reality, this anti-Semitism, and he realizes that he will never be accepted, and neither other Jews will be accepted. So for him, the only solution would be sort of image, if sort of the situation like if you had lived in a place where people don't like you, and you just pack your bag and move to other place, and you say like goodbye to the people, your previous neighbors basically, and you leave good name behind, and the relationship may improve basically once you move there. Basically he has this sort of like a vision that the Jews should be for always with close relationship with Europe, and even thought he states very interestingly that United States must conquer Europe, just like large landowner usually buys the small lands near him and just absorbs it. So we also live in an era where Europe, we could say that Europe is pretty much under innermost United States influence, and we can pretty much conquered in terms of political influence and in terms of safety and etc. In many aspects, United States military is everywhere in extremely important strategic locations, and they have their own deploy their own nuclear weapons, and obviously only the United States has the actual keys sort of for that nuke. So it's interesting how his vision comes true, but at the same time what is very interesting is that for his period, right, for his time, even this statement and the idea that America will eventually be able to conquer Europe, or the idea that Jewish state can exist, both of these statements look equally ridiculous. But here we are. Now, if we had been reading this book like before existence of Jewish state, this book would have probably it seemed like a fucking some sort of a fictional novel written by a madman or some sort of fantasy. But it is not a fantasy, and he says it himself in the book that whether this book will be fantasy or reality will all depend on the Jews and on our own will. And he starts basically a book and ends the book by saying that the Jews who wish to have a state, they will have it. So he is this patriotic person. At last, this is what kind of feeling I'm getting reading his book. And he simply realizes that Jews will never be accepted in society. And he talks about a lot of mythologies that exist about Jews. For example, how Jews are apparently very good in business. And he simply says it like almost bitterly that, first of all, this is like overstatement, not really true idea that Jews are great in business or something. And he also says that it's not like we Jews had any other choice. And this is a very interesting thing, as it says there. Like, Jews only were allowed to trade, basically, in many countries, and they were not allowed to pursue other careers. They could never become generals, trusted to, ministers and so on. And, you have to understand that maybe in modern world, like, being an entrepreneur has much more better name, but back then, during his era, like being a merchant was not that sort of a respectable necessarily thing, it was not that sort of a respectable thing. But he also says it's almost like with greater pain that, it's not like majority of Jews have no other choice. They can only start business. They are not allowed in anything else, or they are highly discriminated in anything else. And I mean, in business they have problem and people screaming and shouting, "Don't buy from the Jews," and etc. And of course, reading his book from modern period, he is wrong about very key things, and some of the things also could be argued against. For example, I remember this sort of he was talking about suffering of poor Jews, especially in Eastern Europe. And it is very interesting thing. Very interesting thing is that he, as I've told you, he shows himself as being some sort of nationalistic. He shows himself being sort of more of a Western-leaning European nationalist, not the Eastern-leaning. So he doesn't have a sort of a good opinion about Eastern Europe in general. You can just see it in his work. And he criticizes Eastern Europe in general, and he pays attention to suffering of the Jews. But my criticism would be that, like, Eastern Europeans had really bad life most of their lives. I mean, just look at Eastern Europe right now. We don't even have to, use some historic whatever. So there's like a bloody war going on in Europe right now. Biggest war after World War II is going on in Europe right now. I cannot believe, by the way, this is the reality we are living in right now. The biggest war since World War II is going on in Europe right now. In Eastern Europe, more specifically. What a great time. So, of course, life in this territory sucks right now for people. What do you expect? Whether it would be whoever lives there right now, their life is not good. They don't have electricity, water, how to take a shower, how to, how to flush a toilet, and how to, all sorts of things. Just imagine living without electricity and water and etc. It would just be awful, especially if you are used to it, right? And the life of other people is pretty bad, but yeah. But yeah. So that's my sort of the counter criticism of him, and it's like the Eastern European criticizing with the Western European here. More that's dynamic here, and yes, he is absolutely right about his prediction about. He's not his prediction, but statement, which is not his. His statement is just well-known wisdom through ages, where he basically states something like, might comes before right. Basically, it's the might that usually matters, and unfortunately, so far we live in that type of world. And maybe it will eventually end, but so far there doesn't seem to be any realistic hope, and we just have to deal with whatever we have. And basically, this is it. And basically, he sort of realizes that the anti-Semitism won't go away, because the Jews will never be accepted. And instead of living that way, for him, he images things very idealistically. And he wants to basically fix Jewish problem. And even so, he himself states that yes, it is true that Jews are not the only people who are suffering. By the way, to be fair, he states that, and he also agrees on that statement, that it is indeed truth. But he also says that let's just fix our suffering first. Let's just fix our problem first. But he also, at the end of the book, sort of says that he doesn't like the idea of universal brotherhood, or he says something like universal brotherhood is not as attractive as it seems, basically. But basically what he does in his work is that he starts to have a detailed plan about the Jewish corporation, and he wants this corporation to be in London because Great Britain is sort of the only power back then who is not as obviously anti-Semitic, unlike other countries. And basically he wants to sort of have this idea of like helping the Jews to sell their property in the right price, and basically help the Jews, the poor Jews first. They should be the ones who migrate, and later will come the middle class, and the last one will be the rich who will come. But now, most of the time, he obviously talks about, in the entire book, talks about these plans. But he never really determines which place Jews should go. Basically, he has two sort of places in his head. One would be Argentina, and the other one would be obviously Israel. And he says simply that we will accept whatever we get. And he also kind of states in his book how great it would be if Sultan of Ottoman Empire were to give the Jews the Palestine, basically. It would be very great. And he also understands that either place they are going to move, he simply says that somehow the society of Jews will decide it, and he does not pay much attention to exactly which place they should go, whether they should go in Argentina or whether they should go in Palestine. But he understands that either way they have to colonize and conquer this place, or the place they are going to go. It is just realistic. He's realistic about it, and he brings the example of how Americans colonize America, and French, and etc. Basically, we have to understand also context of which period he lives in. He lives in an era of great colonialistic powers, and Britain itself is a great colonialistic power back then also, and Americans are back then also still actively colonizing the United States, and etc. A lot of world is not that sort of as it is right now. Like there's slavery, etc. A lot of complicated things is going on in the world back then. So he has this idea of the poor Jews should be the ones who will do the main work, and he also pays a lot of attention that the new place where they move on should be like the Mecca is for the Muslims, and I think he said, I forgot the name of the church. He means merchant specific church, the specific church as it is for the Christians in the book. And basically his vision is that this new place, their new home for the Jews, should be as important as those religious places is for these two religions, basically. And he also mentions Christians a lot because Christians like more majority of Jews live there, but at least this is the part of the world he focuses on. And how they should be returned. And he obviously thinks that the hard work should be done by poor Jews, and he rejects the idea of importing any slave labor and etc. he thinks that 7-hour work they work for the poor Jews would suffice, and he also says that pregnant Jewish women will be freed from work and they will be taken care of, so they can give birth to strong children, well fed. They will be well fed and well taken care of, basically. And he also shows utter disdain about the idea of people, Jews, dying in their new home because of starvation, and he says that this is just unacceptable. And this corporation of Jews should provide for these things and should do all sorts of charity and also help the all sorts of governments and etc. And it's not like he's just focusing on the Jews. No, he also thinks about how to enrich these nations where Jews right now correctly live, and they are every time over a certain period they will move to their new home. So he also thinks a lot about these things, and he also pays a lot of attention to the psychological side. For example, idea of giving people like new clothes, poor Jews especially, so they can have a sense of belonging. And if they don't have money, for example, to buy those new clothes, they should be on a loan, and they can later work on and pay for the clothes and etc. He pays a lot of attention to these things, and obviously understand that the hardest work should be done by the poor Jews. And the poor will generally be most desperate, basically, for the conquest and for anything that's, for example, the middle class and etc. will not bother. And he generally sees the future of the state in younger people who will eventually just move. The healthy and stronger young people and healthy generation that will eventually move in this new state. And they will be simply because they will just chase opportunities, right? Some young men and women, they will eventually get married and they will have children, etc. And the state will be able to grow. And he also stresses on the importance of the idea. But obviously, as I've said already, he is wrong about a couple important things, as I've already discussed it about. And basically, of course, in the book, his plans are much more detailed than I have explained to you right now, because simply there is no necessity. And if you are that interested in the specific plan of the Jewish company and what this company should do in relation to Jews and in relation to governments, etc., then you might as well just read the work yourself and just pay attention, and you will understand it. And now, obviously, in his work, he considers it impossible to something major to happen to the Jews, because it will be violation of social contract and etc. Obviously, that's not how things happened, and we already know it, etc. And he was wrong about it, and he was also wrong about the power of humanity generally, because obviously during his time there were no nuclear weapons, and he mentions that collapse of civilization is impossible because there's a sufficient power for, I guess he means the Eastern world, like America and sort of Europe, that they can just defend themselves, but he obviously doesn't know that there could be such powerful weapons. I mean, this is the quote, basically: the diaspora cannot be reborn unless the civilization of the whole earth should collapse, and such consummation could be feared by none but foolish men. Our present civilization possesses weapons powerful enough for its self-defense, yes, but Mr. Herzl obviously didn't knew that the future civilization will possess powerful enough weapons to not only defend themselves but also to destroy themselves. So obviously this is how it is. His ending statement is basically: we shall live at last as free men on our own soil, and die peacefully in our own homes. The world will be freed by our liberty, enriched by our wealth, magnified by our greatness, and whatever we attempt there to accomplish for our own welfare will react powerfully and beneficially for the good of humanity. His overall message is positive. He sort of wishes for the good. He wishes for the best, and he wants to enrich humanity. And he's at least sees some sort of problem toward one solution. And here's a statement where he states that universal brotherhood is not even a beautiful dream. And I don't understand what he meant by this exactly. I mean, universal brotherhood is not even a beautiful dream. What kind of statement is this? Is it? It's what's wrong with the idea of universal brotherhood? Now, he obviously thinks that. Interesting. I almost forgot to mention. He has quite negative opinion about democracy in generally, and I think his idea about democracy and his criticism of democracy is also very interesting because I'm also sort of a critic of democracy in many areas. And one of the interesting critique he has is that a lot of problems are much more too complicated just to answer yes or no. So. The most problems are much more complicated. For example, Brexit was a recent example of how brilliant the democracy is. Now, unless you are very aware of the Brexit and the situation related to Brexit, you wouldn't find it funny. But basically, let me explain it this way: Brexit is sort of a disaster. It's voting for Brexit, it does not make any sense. Like, it just doesn't make any logical sense. No one would, nobody would consider it like. Basically, imagine if somebody were to tell you, here, vote for a deal that will bring you no whatsoever benefit. In fact, it will take all the benefits from you, in hopes that benefits won't be taken away from you because you are you. And you're like, sure, I will vote for it. And then later it happens and you realize that you just gave up all the benefits and there is nothing. There is no downside to this issue. Sometimes people's vanity gets in their way. Of course, also crowds are easily manipulated and etc. But also he is firmly against the idea of theocracy. He sort of wants like a sort of hybrid democracy, but democracy is under control. Basically, if things go wrong or each individual, somebody is very wrong, they should be stopped. But overall, he considers it right thing to allow individuals to have as much freedom as it is possible. And here's also another thing he says: but a state is formed not by pieces of land, but rather by a number of men united under sovereign rule. Also. He also obviously understands that the new land, there's three important things the Jews immediately need to understand. An accurate scientific investigation of all natural resources of the country. This is the first one. The second, the organization of the strictly centralized administration. And third, the distribution of land. The tasks intersect one another and will all be carried out in conformity with the now familiar object in view. By the way, since I've already mentioned the investigation of all natural resources of the country, I think it was the Benjamin Netanyahu who said this joke about basically I'm not sure. Basically, it was a joke about Jews walked in desert for 40 years and they finally found the only place where there is no oil in Middle East. But now, this is a very funny joke actually. But the thing is not about this joke, though it is very funny joke. But the thing is that this joke is another thing, but the Netanyahu was saying in interview that in fact we are very lucky that we are in a place where there is no oil and etc. I believe they found some gas resources in the sea or something, because he was like, because now we can use our brains. And it's like, of course, there's nothing wrong with his statement, but what else? What else could have said? God damn it! Why there is no oil or anything in this place? Basically, little humor never hurt anyone. And basically, but assessing these three components for the Herzel is very important thing. But it's also very interesting how the entire book ends without Herzl deciding where should this new state be, as if for him it doesn't matter. These principles, regardless, should be implemented whether it would be Argentina or Palestine. It simply doesn't really matter. And he also mentions this when we journey out of Egypt again, we shall not leave the flesh but behind. Basically he looks at this new migration of Jews as sort of the journey out of Egypt. So there's this sort of attitude towards moving to this new place. And also he mentions that our commentary phrase is peculiar and unique, for we are bound together only by faith of our fathers. And this is also the truth, because the Jews back then, or at this point, they don't have a common language and etc. as a result of challenges, and only ideology and the will of the people and the desire and the young blood can make this new state happen. And as I said already, it also states about this. Excuse me. He also states this that Jews. There is no point in arguing with anti-Semites. Their hatred is not rational, and there is no point in it. And he also says that we as Jews are probably disliked as much as for our gifts as we are for our faults. This is what it is. And also this statement about to understand how he views the Jewish state. The new Jewish state must be properly founded, with due regard to our future honorable position in the world. Therefore, every obligation in the old country must be scrupulously fulfilled before leaving. The Society of Jews and the Jewish Company will grant cheap passage and certain advantages in settlement to those only who can present an official testimonial from the local authorities, certifying that they have left their affairs in good order. And this is such an interesting statement that I think in this statement, this statement also proves what I told you in the beginning of this video, that he is deeply nationalist and he has deep respect toward Europe. Is just deeply disappointed by short-mindedness and short-sightedness of crowds, and he just has no choice, and he promotes the existence of the Jewish state. And this is, I don't want to sound too melancholic or sort of regretful, but certainly it's very regretful that such a people were driven to this point. It's such a stupidity of Europe, but and just of the people generally. But the thing is that it's sort of like a loving. Especially this quote, he talks about especially such an honorable person. He's we won't take just people who just did not left things behind in good order. It's more thing could be said, but I just don't want to say it right now. But the thing is that the Jews who wish for a state will have it, and the Jewish state already exists, and there are many challenges, difficulties, and I really don't pay much attention to the Jewish state right now or anything, but I hope that a state will prosper, and all sorts of challenges will be eventually overcome. Because I understand that there is certain tensions, and I believe that society of Jews and the Jewish state and their allies of the state will be able to overcome all sorts of challenges. And I believe that at the end of the day, the reason and justice will prevail, and hopefully we will live in a peaceful world where there will be no wars and no deaths and etc. But so far we are forced to live in a reality where might makes right, or might comes before justice. And this is it, my fellow citizens. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already, and comment down below what you think about the Jewish State by Theodor Herzl.